Welcome to Steve Savant's Money, the name of the game. Hi everyone, I'm your host, Steve Savant, syndicated financial columnist and money gamer extraordinaire. Today we're talking about protecting against overlooked business liabilities with author and attorney, Ike Devji. Well, welcome to the show, Ike.
Thank you, Steve. It's a pleasure to be here.
I have to tell you, when I saw your laundry list of overlooked liabilities and the exposure, especially in the litigation atmosphere that we live in, I wanted to bring you on the show and talk direct to our business owners. Ike, this is all you do. And there's very few attorneys in the United States that actually, what I would call, specialize in asset protection, a proactive way to protect businesses before we get into litigation. In one of your articles, I think you cited something like 70,000 open litigations a day, was it?
Yes, up to 70,000 lawsuits are filed every day in the United States.
Unbelievable. Well, I want to talk about the first one right out of the chute because malpractice insurance I kind of get, and I think most of our listeners will get it. Talk a little bit about that, but I want to punt as soon as we're done and head right into employee protection.
Sure. Well, malpractice insurance, whether we're talking about a medical professional or whether we're talking about a licensed professional like an attorney like myself or a securities licensed financial advisor, or let's say we're talking about somebody who's a contractor who owns a construction company who might be one of our clients, right? All of those people have some basic professional liability exposure. And most of those people, including you and me, have what we would call malpractice or E&O insurance in place to help with that. And of course, that coverage is core. That's the most basic foundation. And we always want to see that coverage in place. And we want to see an umbrella in place behind each of those kinds of coverages. So if we have a general liability policy for our medical practice or our advisory firm or whatever it is, we want to see that in place, and then we want to see an umbrella above that. The unfortunate part of that is, as you and I have discussed in great detail in the past, is that we have people who are lulled into a false sense of security, the emperor's new clothes, that, hey, I've got an S-Corp and an LLC and I have an umbrella policy. What could happen? And as we've discussed, there are a lot of things that can happen. And we're seeing the same exposures over and over again.
Well, why do I have exposures from my own employees? That's what I'm trying to...
Well, your own employees, are an exposure to you on a number of different levels. Number one, you are responsible in an increasingly onerous environment for your compliance and how you treat those employees, what their conditions of employment are. And the things that come to mind most easily are things like discrimination, failure to hire, failure to promote, wrongful termination, sexual harassment, gender bias, hostile work environment. All of those kinds of things are specific claims that employees can make against employers.
Do you see more claims coming from employees than you do in malpractice?
We are increasingly seeing non-malpractice claims, including employee claims, posing a larger threat to the thousands of physicians and business owners that I work with just in my own practice. In fact, employee lawsuit exposure on a national level, we're not just talking about my clients, we're talking about everybody out there who's watching. Employee lawsuits are one of the largest exposures that businesses face. The average American small business right now, and some of the folks who may be watching your show right now who own a business, are 5 times more likely to be sued by an employee than for any other business reason. And as we said, there are a whole list of reasons why people might sue that we're always concerned about. We're also concerned about things the employees do. So it's not just what you do to them, but what they might be doing to a third party or even to each other.
Now, I heard you say this before. My employee's out on his own Facebook site saying things about the competition and so forth. I thought that was on his time and on his Facebook site.
Well, if you get into a situation where the person who feels slighted is going to make a claim, are they going to be more likely to try and collect against the employee or the owner of the business with the deeper pocket? So that's issue number one. Is, remember, I'm a former litigation attorney, and I've been doing asset protection planning for the last 10 years as a result of being trained to follow the deepest pocket. And what we saw was that lawsuits are not always about right or wrong or fault. They're about collectability. It's a business model. And people need to understand that they are responsible for protecting themselves against that business model.
How much does it cost to protect? Is this really a lot of money?
To get the kind of insurance that we're talking about? No, it's nominal. In fact, the costs of most of these kinds of insurances cost less than the initial consult, and certainly less than having to retain a lawyer to defend you against the very first time you have an issue. So let's say you own a couple of restaurants and one of your employees is suing you because she says the manager at store A has been harassing her. Now, is she going to sue him, another employee, or is she going to sue the owner? She's going to sue the owner. And the owner is going to have to go out and pay a lawyer for a consult. And he's going to pay that person several $100s an hour to talk to them and tell them about the problem. And if they have to retain that person, they're going to have to write that attorney a retainer check for $5,000 to $10,000 as a minimum. And depending on the scope of the claim or the number of employees involved, if it's several people in a very big issue that's actionable at a federal level, that retainer is going to be substantially larger.
Well, we'll be right back with more of what Mike about these commonly passed over insurance protection items right after the break.
Take a close look at your hard-earned dollar. How do you think your money's doing? Are you keeping an eye on it? Is it protected from taxes, inflation, and market risk? Over time, those Washingtons could become Franklins. With tax-advantaged indexed universal life from one of the largest distributors of indexed universal life, Ash Brokerage.
Well, Mike, let's talk about directors and officers' liability, because most of us, we're talking to small business today. They're the president of their company. Their wife might be the vice president. They may have brothers and sisters in closely family-held businesses. Talk a little bit about this, because I thought, well, I have my malpractice insurance. I have my insurance now that protects against employee suits. I've tried to do myself to insulate through my normal PUP policy, my umbrella policy, plus my own errors and omissions. But now I have another obligation because I'm a leader. I'm part of the board. Talk a little bit about that.
Sure. D&O coverage is just directors and officers that we refer to as D&O for short. Covers a lot of the big gaps that we see between professional liability insurance and personal liability insurance. So we understand that everyone watching should have high coverage on their home and their auto, and they should also have a high umbrella over that. They should also have professional liability coverage that covers what they do as the specific course of their business. So for instance, if you're a financial advisor, you'd have malpractice or E&O insurance. If you're a real estate agent or a realtor, or if you're a contractor or a lawyer or a doctor is of course the most obvious example, you have insurance in place for that. But what have you done to protect yourself against this large group of responsibilities that you now have as an officer or director or leader or board member of not only a company, whether it's public or private, but how about on a board, a school board, a church board, a foundation board? Great, you work with the local museum and you raise money and you do all of this hard work out of some sense of altruism. Wonderful, we encourage that. It's also important that you're protected against the exposure that something like that creates.
So if you were a business person and you had a very affluent, let's say your business is doing quite well, but you also have these ancillary responsibilities like nonprofits or this museum that you, as you brought up.
Or the school board.
These are issues that you need to protect yourself and find out if that organization has this kind of protection, and they'll send you the exact copy of the policy so you can have your attorney review it.
You're 100% on point, and that's exactly what I do with my clients. Is number one, I ask if they do serve or have these kinds of responsibilities.
That's part of your first contact interview.
It is. It is. We ask, do you serve on the board of a corporation, partnership, publicly held, foundation, whatever it is? And then we ask the client to go back to that organization and say, number one, is there coverage that covers my service? And number two, may I have a copy of that in-force policy? Going on a reliance that somebody told you that, oh yeah, we have a guy, he handles all that stuff, don't worry about it, we have it in place, is not going to protect you adequately if push comes to shove and there's an exposure in the future. And remember the kinds of representations that even small business owners are being asked to make these days on compliance, on accounting procedures, on healthcare policy compliance, right? Where you have all of our clients out there now running around concerned about what Obamacare and the Affordable Care Act is doing to what their legal responsibilities are as a lawyer. There's a case recently out of California where the CEO of a large corporation is being held personally liable by the EEOC for $200 million plus in fines and penalties because of employment practices liability implemented by this large corporation. Now that's at the highest end of the scale. But you and I as employers, or our clients that are watching, or people like our clients that are watching, are certainly going to have the same exposure on a different level. And it's still very important that's been met.
Well, let's shift gears a little bit. What about data breaches? I mean, we have all these businesses, we have important information. Some of it's medical, some of it's financial, on our clientele. What kind of exposure do we have if we don't have this? I mean, if Target can get hacked, where does that leave me?
Right. Target, Neiman Marcus just this last weekend was exposed. It goes on and on and on. And I warn any and every client who has either financial data, personal identifying data, or HIPAA-protected healthcare data that they handle for clients. And it could be something as simple as selling insurance that somebody does, or a law office or a medical office that has that information. If that company is breached, and sometimes that breach comes from outside, sometimes it comes from inside. Remember, we don't need to just protect ourselves against the professional hackers and criminals that are operating from shadowy places in different parts of the world. Yes, those guys pose a threat, and that cyber crime is a multi-trillion-dollar international criminal syndicate. But what about the person in your office that loses a computer or a smartphone or gets the iPad stolen from their car at lunch that has access to your company's CRM system or your client records? Or what about the case that we had right here in Arizona where you and I are, where we recently had a very large, high-profile medical clinic had one of its own employees steal patient credit card numbers, and they have 40,000 patients that they are now responsible for, number one, repairing any damage, informing 40,000 people in a formal way that, hey, by the way, we lost your stuff. And if you have a problem, let us know. The remediation and the credit monitoring. 40,000 patients for this medical practice, even if they had to pay for credit monitoring for all 40,000 1 year at $10 a year. Do the math.
Well, that's our show for today. I want to thank Ike for being our special guest and today's money mentor. And before moving forward with any ideas on our show, always consult your tax advisor or legal counsel. And as the good Reverend John Wesley once said, make all you can, save all you can, give all you can. I'm Steve Savant. See you next week.